Hey, GLP-1 plus sides community. Before we jump into the podcast, please take the time to leave us a 5-star review on whatever audio platform you're listening to the podcast on. Share your story and how the podcast has helped you. This will help us get referred up in the audio platform so that we can reach more people that need our help, our support, and guidance from our doctors. Help us get loud and change things.
Hello.
Dr. Myra.
Hey,
It's so
Dr.
good to
Myra.
have you.
Hey, Dr. Myra. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
love your
we're so
lives. I
excited
love your
to have you
content.
here. So I wanted to start just a little bit with you. If you could tell us a little bit about like what you do. I mean, you don't have to go into your credentials and things like that, but we obviously know you're on TikTok quite a bit. But your company and things like that and what you're passionate about, and then we can go from there.
Sure. I'm Myra. You should just call me Myra. We're going to keep it casual. But I run Join Mochi, which is a telehealth obesity medicine practice. And the goal is really to do comprehensive non-surgical bariatric care. So everything from medication-based approaches to nutrition-based therapies to fitness coaching in one model. So
awesome. And what made you feel like that was an area you wanted to go and a company you wanted to start?
Yeah. I was initially really interested in vascular and thoracic surgery, which is a very different space. But then I ended up doing a research project I did this thesis on basically bariatric management and outcomes and the laparoscopic revolution that we've seen, which is that a lot of bariatric surgery pre-2000s or early 2000s used to be big open surgical approaches, and then it became laparoscopic, endoscopic, balloon, a whole bunch of other things. And there was also this explosion around medication-based management, both pre-operatively and post-operatively, so much so that many patients never actually get bariatric surgery. They go to bariatric surgery centers as a referral from primary care and end up going through medication-based and lifestyle management approaches. And then I was working through this whole project and talked to my thesis advisor, like, why does this not exist? I was in Washington. The area had like 5 million people, and there were 3 of these centers, and they each had a 2-year-long wait list, and nobody knew that these things existed. Like everybody I talked to was looking for supplements, looking for berberine, looking for any kind of number of things to try to help with this, and none of them were evidence-based FDA-approved medications because they didn't know that it existed. So
yeah, that's amazing.
You heard about Rachel's story about struggling with childhood obesity, PCOS, ADHD. How are GLP-1s helping to alleviate those PCOS symptoms?
Yeah. I think that there's a number of different ways that GLP-1 medications work for PCOS. I made a video on this a while ago, but there's the initial benefit of helping with weight loss. And of course, weight and fat cells are a hormone producing type of cell. And so just in that effect alone, it can oftentimes help with a lot of the insulin resistance and symptoms of hyperandrogenism that PCOS patients have. PCOS is interesting though, because there's been a lot of research into specifically how GLP-1s can also be help to resume ovulation, help on ultrasound to reduce ovarian follicle size, help with restoring fertility in a lot of patients. So there's a lot of hand waving happening with like specifically why GLP-1s outside of weight loss can help. But yeah, a lot of different mechanisms.
That's incredible. And going into like say ADHD, would that also make that hormonal connection as well?
I think ADHD is a little different. There's a number of addictive pathways that GLP-1s also work on. A lot of what Rachel said is true, right? In the dopaminergic pathways of using food as a reward system. GLP-1s can also help with those. So they've been seen to help with alcohol addictions, help with smoking, help with shopping addiction, help with a lot of patients after bariatric surgery end up with things called transfer addiction, which is that they transfer their addictions from food to other things. And being on GLP-1s can be really helpful with that to suppress those cravings. So
that's great.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of expand. I'm going to be selfish for a moment because this is what I went through. So I tried Contrave a couple of years ago. And while I felt somewhat of a shift. Contrave like twisted up my insides like a pretzel. Like the abdominal pain and cramps were terrible. And it turned my menstrual cramps into like I had to be off work, vomiting. They were really violent.
Yeah.
And then I stopped taking it, but I would still occasionally have that abdominal pain. Doctors had me do a saline ultrasound, couldn't find anything. Colonoscopy, you're fine. But I've noticed since taking the Mounjaro, because that after I stopped taking the Contrave, it would still kind of surface every couple of months. I'd have those twisty cramps. But ever since taking the Mounjaro, I have not had the big bad monster hit. And so, my doctor and I are thinking that maybe was it hormonal causing my insides to just be ravaged?
Yeah.
Is there a way that Contrave does that to your hormones? Or
As far as I know, Contrave isn't really working on the same hormonal pathways. So Contrave is a
Yeah.
combination of bupropion and naltrexone, bupropion being an atypical antidepressant and naltrexone being a medication that's usually used for all kinds of different addictions, most commonly used for smoking cessation. But it can also be used for obesity in combination with bupropion. I don't think it has the side effect of doing anything to your insides or altering hormones. Mostly it's working through craving reward pathways. So,
Very interesting.
Wow.
yeah.
Got to find some things to get where we are. So
Yeah.
that was great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
We hear these terms so much, but what do they really mean? So if you could just tell us the difference between type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and metabolic disorder diagnosis.
Sure. I would think of your pancreatic function as a spectrum. And your pancreas is responsible for producing insulin and also has all kinds of receptors that your cells use to say, hey, there's sugar in the bloodstream, use that as a source of energy. In general, there's like two pathways that you can use for energy. You can use sugars coming in that you are eating, or you can use all other types of stored forms of energy. So you can use ketones if you're this is what keto is using ketones as energy. You can use proteins as energy. You can use fats as energy. You can convert other things to sugars to use as energy, a whole bunch of other things. But generally speaking, do you want to use energy now or do you want to use stored energy? Your pancreas has beta cells, which are responsible for producing insulin and responding to blood sugar. And when you end up with high levels of sugar constantly circulating, some of these start to go haywire. And the initial pieces of a couple of beta cells going haywire is insulin resistance or metabolic disorders, which is that you have a couple of them that are a little off, but if you're able to get your blood sugars under control and you're able to reset this with either medication-based or lifestyle-based or both, you can kind of get back to normal, right? So insulin resistance in that phase, this is like pre-diabetic as well. All of these things are considered a phase where your pancreas has enough function that it can be restored. Type 2 diabetes is when enough of your blood sugar has been chronically elevated for long enough that enough pancreatic beta cells are out. And you now have just kind of diminished ability to tell what source you want to be using for sugars. Do you want to be using the sugars coming in or do you want to be using the sugars from storage? And your body's kind of bad at that now because these cells aren't responding appropriately. So sometimes it's going to use fat cells for converting back to energy, even though there's tons of sugar in your bloodstream. And sometimes it's going to be using other storage forms for energy. This is still reversible, right? So some type 2 diabetics that are just barely diagnosed will end up coming back out with lifestyle and medication management to the point where they're normalizing A1C levels, which is the average of your blood sugar over a couple months. Other times, if you have gone way, way, way over and you are not diagnosed as diabetic until you have very little pancreatic beta cell function left, that's considered much harder to reverse all the way back down. And most likely you'll need to be on medication long term. So I would think of it as like as a function of how many of your pancreatic beta cells are still working and how many of them can still be recovered.
Never heard that explained like that.
Broke it down so like Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it makes so much sense, especially I'm seeing more conversations about the pancreas and GLP-1s and how insulin is so important to everyone. It
Yeah.
isn't just important to diabetics, but it's
Yeah.
really like the conduit almost to letting your body know what to do. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah. So everybody has a pancreas and everybody has insulin. Type 1 diabetics are not responding to any amount of insulin, and so that they require insulin. They're not producing insulin, so they require insulin to be given to get that response.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they'll end up with way too high blood sugar. Type 2 diabetics have just a spectrum of function of their pancreas. So I will say that your pancreas function is basically there's always improvements that you can make, right? So even if you were diagnosed at the very end of A1C of 10 plus, you can always make a lot of improvement and prevent the other complications of just having diabetes and having chronically high blood sugar in your bloodstream. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I have a second question, since we're on this train. So why do we treat type 2 diabetes and obesity in similar ways now with GLP-1 medications? And do you think these medications might eventually replace surgery?
I think this is two different questions.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I think the GLP-1 medications are not unique in that they are being used to treat obesity. So SGLT2 is another class of is another class of diabetes medication that is also helpful with weight loss. Metformin was one of the older ones. Plus minus how much weight loss it helps with, but it was also considered that if you're able to help with some of this insulin resistance and controlling blood sugars, you will also help with weight loss. I think the general principle for a lot of these is the same, is that medications that can help reduce this insulin resistance can help with weight loss. GLP-1s are just unique in that they also have this other mechanism of altering the rate that your stomach is emptying into your intestines and making you feel full for longer and helping on all of these brain signaling pathways that they're also very helpful for obesity. So,
okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
The second question you had was, do I think they're going to replace surgery?
Yes.
I think they're not. I don't know if they're there yet. I think that we will see a massive reduction in the number of patients going for surgery. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done for people who are BMI 50, 60 plus to be using these before surgery or using these after surgery. I don't know. I don't think there's enough out there yet to know if it's going to get rid of surgery completely. There's always going to be a use case for surgery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
20 seconds a week to lose 20% of your weight in a year with diet and exercise. That's the power of GLP-1s through Ro. Ro helps find the medication that's right for you, based on cost, availability, and your weight loss goals. Losing weight with GLP-1s is possible through Ro.
You like to talk a lot about studies and data, and I love that.
Yeah.
Is the SURMOUNT-2 study that just came out. So I'm really curious kind of about really what your position is on that. I know you've done a TikTok on it, but obviously not everybody listening or watching may not follow you. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is? And of course, like what you think that may end up doing in terms of how insurance will start treating these medications and covering them?
Yeah, so basically the SURMOUNT-2 trial is the second of 5 trials that Eli Lilly is doing for Mounjaro. In order to get any medication approved by the FDA for a certain indication, you need 2 large-scale phase 3 clinical trials to be submitted. I'm sorry, I have a 10-week-old kitten and it is losing its mind.
That's okay. We're animal lovers.
Yes.
Okay. The goal with SURMOUNT-2 is basically to prove that it is useful for obesity and for type 2 diabetes. I think you need both SURMOUNT-1 and SURMOUNT-2 results to be finalized and for the FDA to review them before any decision can happen by the FDA. I think it's unlikely that the FDA will approve it for obesity before the fall. From their from the data from SURMOUNT-2, it looks like it is a better drug than Ozempic or Wegovy. But I think it is also going to be really hard to get coverage for these medications. Before FDA approves it, like I'm thinking very, very limited coverage. Yeah. After FDA approves it for obesity, I think all the plans that have Wegovy will add it. And I think some plans slowly will continue to add it. I think the biggest barrier is going to be CMS adding it. Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has a carve out for 2 different classes of medication. Infertility treatments and obesity medications are specifically, it's written in there that you cannot cover these under any circumstances because it's considered cosmetic and the government won't pay for it. There was an interesting New England Journal of Medicine piece on this, which basically said that the break-even point for government to cover this is at $300 a month. And at $300 a month, it makes sense for government to be willing to pay for all of the obesity medication rather than pay for the comorbidities that will happen later. So
yeah, I'm super curious what that like. I had heard that there was some data on that, on like how much money we could technically save from a government perspective if we treat it.
Yeah, and it's also partially because the health insurances only think of health insurances treat patients as customers that will only last for 3 to 4 years. So they're only looking at what's going to happen to people in 3 to 4 years because that's how long people are on the average insurance plan.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, and diabetes takes longer than 3 to 4 years to develop. And so for a lot of these insurance companies, it's like, this is not our problem, which is terrible. It's a complete...
Wow. So I got somewhat of a controversial question for you. It's all a buzz in the world, and you know, it's compounding with the shortages and the demand and people fighting in the streets, fires and setting cars on fire. Okay, that was just madness. But and the FDA saying that you can no longer compound eventually. What are your thoughts on compounding?
Yeah. Oh, go
actually,
ahead.
And
no,
actually,
go ahead.
No, I'm ready.
You go.
What are your thoughts on compounding?
Yeah. Okay. I think I want to start by like talking about what compounding is and what is it used for and where does this come from.
Yes.
So compounding is like a very old practice of basically custom formulations of medications for patients. It was traditionally done for removing dyes for certain medications, switching to different fillers, using different bases based on allergies, based on specific patient recommendations, customizing dosing. And it is a very old practice of pharmacy. I think today, the way that we get generic medication is it comes from India or China as a supplier. It comes to your CVS pharmacy. It gets pre-filled into vials and it gets dispensed out to patients. And this whole practice of compounding really went away because of efficiency. A lot of the medications that we have today that are generics that are being dispensed are also coming from internationally. The controversy of compounding really came up in 2005 when there was this huge scandal of injectable medication that was contaminated. And at that time, the FDA had extremely lax guidelines around what compounding pharmacies had to do to make sure things were sterile and where they were getting their substances from and all of this. And since then, they've made it a lot harder. And there are now compounding pharmacies that are, I mean, they do a lot of compounding for ICU care, right? To do custom preparations for IV medications. There is very much I think there's a very interesting set of patent case law around this, which is basically that if a medication is on brand and on label, you cannot make an exact copy of the medication through compounding. But you can buy the bulk drug product from a US-based manufacturer. You can make almost the exact same medication. So you can do very, very slight dosage changes to bypass the patent with the exact same other ingredients using all US-based manufacturing. And you can also do a slight difference. So you can add some things like vitamin B6, B12, anything like that. That's basically what legitimate compounding pharmacies are doing right now, is that they're able to buy bulk drug product from a Pennsylvania-based facility or North Carolina-based facility, and then mix it with one or two either do the different dosing or mix it with vitamin B6 or B12 to bypass the patent. The guidance that's been issued from North Carolina and Mississippi and from some of these other states is very much going after all of the pharmacies that are using research use chemical or asking people to reconstitute their own peptide, which is an extremely sketchy way to go. Because reconstituting is buying powder, is buying research use powder, mixing it up yourself with sterile water, and then injecting it. And so there's no sterility with any of that. Research use chemicals, of course. Oh, this is my kitten.
Hey, kitty. Hey, kitty.
Yeah. Research use chemical is it's just not tested for human use. There's no beyond use date testing. There's nothing that's been done to check that it's going to be legitimate or have the same effect in your body. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
the FDA does also have like a lot of very interesting guidance around how compounding pharmacies are supposed to exist. What is the research they're supposed to be doing to make sure that's the same product? What is the testing they have to submit to? All the regulations that they have to do to exist as a pharmacy. I just think that there's good actors in the space and there's bad actors in the space, and differentiating these has become patient responsibility, which is the scary part, which is that you're leaving it up to patients to say, like, find your own compounding pharmacy and do your own cost differentiating and all of that.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
In terms of like with the changes that are coming, with people saying, oh, well, there were laws during COVID where it like opened up a lot more things for compound in general. Now that's going to change. So what will patients that are using a compound now, right? Like what should they be looking for to see if this is something you should continue or if they should go and look somewhere else?
Like if they're seeing a sketchy pharmacy or not?
Yeah, like how do they know if it's sketchy?
Yeah. I mean, if if it says research use, that's an obvious red flag.
Well, yeah.
If the pharmacy that you're ordering from is, I guess the biggest things is research use, and if it has anything to do with reconstituting your own peptide, that's extremely sketchy, and it's very likely that you're getting something that's not a legitimate product. As far as differentiating between like multiple different vials, it's pretty hard for patients to be able to do. So
so some of these pharmacies that are saying like they're not going to carry semaglutide anymore after a certain date, and they're saying come now and we'll give you 3 months supply because that way you'll be prepared because we won't sell anymore. What is making them say that they're not going to sell it anymore? Like,
so if you're making the exact duplicate of an on-patent product,
they're doing the exact
somebody will come after you for patent infringement.
Because it's exact duplicates.
Because it's an exact duplicate.
Okay.
Also, I think that's a money grab. My personal sense on that is I think that's a money grab to try to like fear monger around this North Carolina, Mississippi stuff.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Money grab. Yeah. What other GLP-1s are coming and when?
Yeah.
Coming down the pipeline.
You could tell us like some others that are like in studies and
there's a ton that are in studies. I think the general of like the large pharmaceutical companies that are trying to get in the obesity medicine space, there are 4 mechanisms that they're going for. Different types of GLP-1s, meaning that like we know that GLP-1 works. We know that's a naturally produced hormone. We know that if you could give GLP-1 to people, it does work. How can you basically make it last longer in your body is the whole game. So with Ozempic and Wegovy, changing up the side chain to make it last in your body for a week was a revolutionary thing compared to Saxenda, which is a daily injectable, or any of the older ones. The newer ones that are coming down the pipeline are some combination of GLP-1, GIP, glucagon receptor agonists, and amylin receptor agonists. This is kind of the 4 mechanisms that people are going for. So GLP-1s include all of the Ozempic, Wegovy, et cetera. There's cotadutide, but I think that one is going to get pulled from the market just because it works about as Saxenda. It works about as well as Saxenda, and it's not coming out for 2 years. And so I think Amgen is like, the ship's not gonna fly. There's retatrutide, which I think is the most exciting one that's coming out, which is the triple agonist from Eli Lilly, which is GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon. That one has extremely good data, and that one's the only one that even 3 months after the last injection, patients still had maintained their weight loss.
Oh, wow.
Which is the newest one.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is not true for Mounjaro or for any of the
Right.
other types. Usually there is some amount of regain as soon as patients come off of medication. There's one that was GIP and glucagon, so not the GLP-1. That one doesn't seem to be doing great in phase 2 trials, so I'm not sure if that was going to make it. There's CagriSema, which is an amylin and a GLP-1 mixed together. That one is expected to go head-to-head with Mounjaro, and it's a little unclear who's going to win because it's a GLP-1 and amylin analog versus a GLP-1 GIP. And that's a trial that everybody's waiting on. And then there's Eli Lilly has its own amylin analog that's also going against cagrillinide. So cagrillinide is the one from Novo Nordisk. It's going to be mixed to make CagriSema. It's called a KBR something. It's still in phase 2 for their own amylin analog. So, yeah. Wow. And then there's the oral forms of all of this. So,
yeah.
And, the oral forms are going to be interesting just because there's just a lot of people, especially for pediatric populations, that are very needle phobic.
Yeah.
And so if we want to make progress in peds, this is going to be giving oral forms is going to be huge.
Yeah. 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 I think, I had kind of heard that like Rybelsus, right, which is, from what I understand, that's like Ozempic, right? But I heard that it wasn't quite as effective as it was using the injections. Is that true?
Yeah, some people say that it's not about as effective. It also has higher rates of nausea, relatively speaking. And so some people are just like, why am I doing this when I could get the injectable? So
yeah. All right. Well, gosh, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you were coming.
So
this has just
learned.
been fantastic. I know our audience is going to be so excited to hear this information. And it's really nice too, I think, when we can have stories and like have it validated with like science and data and like, this is real. We're not making it up, you know? So thank you so much for providing that for us, you know? It's really wonderful. Where can people find you and follow more about your work?
Sure. I have an Instagram, which is Join Mochi, and then I have 2 TikToks, one of which I use a lot more, which is Myra Join Mochi. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
Food has definitely been a very dominant voice in my head. That's not the main focus anymore. Dieting, exercising, and adding GLP-1s through Ro is a game changer. I have such a sense of mental freedom since I started with Ro. Food no longer controls my thoughts. Family time used to revolve around food, and now it revolves around what we're gonna go do together.